Hi, everyone, and welcome to Decentralized Voices. My name is Daria, and I'm excited to have Mashal Waqar, CMO at Octant, Forbes 30 Under 30 Middle East and grants researcher. Together with Mashal, we'll discuss personal and career growth in the AI era, the meaning of a public good project in 2026, and what it means to be Ethereum-aligned. Stay with us for the whole episode and share it with your friends. Mashal, I'm happy to have you today. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you for having me. I'm Mashal. I'm a marketer. I am a writer. I'm a recovering entrepreneur. And I've had many lives, including being a techie. And that's how I actually started professionally.
Please share your story and how did you came to your new role as a CMO at Octant?
I've got a security background, so cybersecurity and whatnot. I had no business being in media, but I ended up in it. I loved storytelling. I loved writing. I've loved media since I was a very young kid. And I grew up in a part of the world where you didn't have a lot of opportunities for women to be represented in media. And I often felt like most Western publications always spoke about women from the region that I'm from, which is the Middle East, and I'm South Asian, but I grew up as an expat. But you didn't really have a lot of third culture voices. And it was always people speaking for us instead of us directly speaking. And that frustrated me a lot. When I was in my final year in university and I had made it my life mission, because I knew like if you needed to get a job, you needed work experience, but to get work experience, you needed a job. And it's like a chicken and egg chase. My life's biggest goal was financial independence. And I had made it my mission that I would do whatever it took to grow and to ensure that I would be able to have that before I graduated. I was working at two other startups at that time. One was a security one was a tech startup in Dubai. I was impressed because it was this platform called The Tempest. And I felt like I finally found a platform where every single piece I could connect with and resonate with. So I spent hours and hours going through articles on there, and I decided to email the founders, reached out, said, these are a few different pieces that I think you should have. I also think you're missing narratives from women in tech. I am in tech. I'd love to share experiences around this. So I sent a couple of pitches and she replied back and she said, all right, cool, join on board. So I joined as a staff writer. And in 6 months later, the founder asked me to join as a co-founder and CTO initially. So that's how I joined. This was like the prime era of new media companies, which is, I know a lot of people talk about new media now, but that was truly the era of a lot of new media companies that were starting. And that's how I joined and learned very quickly what it meant to be an entrepreneur, because it is a very tough path to be a founder and to run a company. And we had newsletters, we had articles, videos, podcasts, everything you could think of in short form and long form. Yeah, spent a lot of years doing that. We had millions and millions of readers, and so it was made quite a lot of waves in that specific area specifically. What I got a lot of recognition for was being a young founder in media, representing a lot and helping grow a lot of that stuff. And I think very quickly you realize like there's no better way to build audiences than to actually get to local stories and to actually directly go to the sources. We were often the first ones breaking headlines by having writers in these regions writing stories. So I remember we once got death threats for pieces that we wrote about like abortions, to like sex workers sharing their stories, to a lot of like taboo topics in regions where it was considered a complete no-no. We had a lot of stories from. And so I was very proud of the kind of work that I did. But media really, really burns you out, and you need to, like, it's so cutthroat and it ages you so fast. And I learned a lot really quickly. And so at the end of 2020, I decided I was done with the media space. I transitioned out and I did a couple of things, joined, and actually I built a program to help early stage founders get to revenue in 60 days. So it was called 60 Day Startups. It came after seeing a lot of businesses shut down. It was quite a, yeah. I just saw a lot of people who just really just needed support in different aspects. I had enough of a network to do that. A friend of mine at the time also felt passionate about this. So we built this program together and we helped grow it. And that was very cool. And then I scaled a D2C startup. And it was the first femtech startup in the Middle East, touching on taboo topics like women's health. And again, this is a topic when you realize and you look at the stats and you realize, one, women's health is so underfunded. and it's abysmal. But in the Middle East specifically, like a lot of studies that are done even, and I was shocked to learn this, like so many studies are not done with our data sets and our bodies in mind.
Mhm.
And so a lot of research may not always be applicable. And there was just so much of work that needed to be done in that area. So I worked in that space for a little bit. And through that and through helping that startup scale, I learned that my lessons from media and audience building and community building were quite effective, and it felt like second nature. Like being able to scale things is so, and once you've done that in media and you can operationally just do it anywhere. And so I ran a consultancy and I was working with government clients. I worked with startup founders. I worked with, projects of all stages, and I really enjoyed it. And this was a time when NFTs were starting to grow quite a bit. And so I guess the crypto starting of my career was Bitcoin workshops in 2015 and 2016, helping people learn about it. But I never figured I would actually professionally work in this space. And so even though I knew about cryptography and all those cool things, I had loosely kept up with Ethereum and Bitcoin. And it was in 2021 when I started with NFTs and got back into the space. I started DAOing. And I think it was through that I realized, wait, this is such a cool space. And I think there's something really exciting here. And I actually felt bullish enough to fully want to transition to slowly transitioning out of my consultancy and to working full time in this space.
Thanks so much for such great intro. Every step you're doing is pushing the boundaries and exploring things that were closed and tabooed, as you mentioned, and especially in the market like Middle East. I know that you was among Forbes 30 under 30 Middle East. So please share, what did you feel that time, and how did you manage to escape to go to a jail, as we know this famous or unfamous joke?
That's a funny question. I think that's very true for Forbes 30 under 30 in the US. In the Middle East, I have not heard of anyone
Different
that,
story.
at least the Middle East one, I'm not aware of people going to jail to my knowledge. So that might be part of why, I don't want to jinx it. I think when I first found out about Forbes, I was very proud of the work that we did, but I think to be on a list like that was very cool. And then to be an expat, and I think I was one of the first Pakistani women to be featured, or Pakistanis in general, on that list. And so it was also another sort of milestone monumentally. Like I think it represented a lot and it felt unreal. But then after it happened, the same people would approach me thinking I would just have something much smarter to say. And so it's funny because a lot of these prestigious awards, right? You could be doing the exact same thing, but the minute you get something like that, people just approach you differently. So at that time, I felt like people would see that and immediately be like, oh, yeah, of course, like we'll chat with you. And so it opened a lot of doors, but it was just funny to see how people would perceive me, the exact same people who, were tougher to talk to beforehand would see that. And so I realized like it's just an interesting social game. A lot of these awards are the minute you see them, it adds more legitimacy, recognition. But yeah, I think it has more to do with external perception than internal one because I'm really, really harsh on myself and probably the harshest. I mean, no one needs to tell me all the shortcomings I have because I will be the first to notice them. And it's something I've been working on, like, rewiring and reframing. But yeah, when it happened, it was crazy. But people still bring it up sometimes. And I'm like, you know what? I've crossed 30. I don't even know if I should have it anymore. I don't know if it matters. I probably should rework my profile at some point.
Now you have opportunity to go to 40 under 40.
Is that a
Who
list?
knows? Yes, there is.
Really
Yeah, yeah,
interesting.
yeah. I don't actually know about 50 under 50, not sure, but 40 under 40 is it's like real list. Yes, so
That is so interesting. I mean, you know what it is? I think if awards matter to you, you'll keep pushing the goalposts further and further and further. Because I actually think for a lot of people, the real prime starts once they cross 40. And I think, especially as someone like I spent a lot of my 20s were focused on, I was just a lot of chaos going on in my life, around me, everywhere. I was so uncertain about things. And I think once you cross that, the older you get, especially as a woman, I feel like I'm more sure of myself and who I am and what I want. And I think that is so special. And when I talk to a lot of my friends who are much older than I am, they're so sure about like just who they are as people. And I really think there's this sort of stability that you get the older you get in a way where you're more sure of yourself. And I love that. So I think there should be more awards and recognition for people regardless of age.
Share about Octant and actually what do you do there as a CMO?
Yeah, at Octant, we've done a lot of different things. I like to think of us as a project that fundamentally cares about Ethereum and has contributed to it. And we're really passionate about sustainable growth. In the last 2.5 years since we launched, we have been funding impactful projects in Ethereum. We started with funding public goods, and then over the years and over every funding round, we got better and better at funding experiments and understanding community incentives and just participation incentives too. And so our model's been simple in the past. It was if you locked GLM, you would get ETH, and then as a user, you could take your ETH, or if you contributed to a project, we would match it. And that was very specific because the project was started by Golden Foundation. Octant now is fully independent and is operationally running independently. And so while Golden Foundation will continue to run rounds on Octant, there's a lot more that we have built and we're going to continue to build. And one of the first things that we launched last year, or at the end of last year, was DeFi vaults, where we've been able to fund all these projects and even our own operations through staked ETH rewards. And we think there's a way where DeFi can be used for sustainable growth. So why would you deplete your treasury when you can use DeFi for funding your budgets and whatnot? And so we launched DeFi Vaults at the end of last year, where any ecosystem can use their treasury, put it to use, and fund whatever they want. And now this year, we're going to be doing a lot more where we've opened up and we're opening up our platform to other ecosystems where if they want to run funding rounds, they can do that. And we want to cover different aspects of the whole capital cycle. So from onboarding, distribution and allocation to evaluation as well, because how do you know what you should fund? How can you fund it better? And how do we actually, if you think about Ethereum as well, funding is not going to be everlasting, especially if you look at the ES mandate too. So with funding actually reducing for a bunch of projects, we see our role growing where we can build the tools and we have part of the capital, but we actually think a lot of other ecosystems can come together to help fund Ethereum and to help grow Ethereum's core projects and impactful projects there too. So I would say that's what our role is to run funding experiments and to help advance Ethereum. And I'm really proud of the work because I think in a space that's so bearish right now, sentiment is an absolute low. We are so excited to be growing and to bring some hopia into the space. I think a lot of the work that we do is extremely effective, and I think we're currently the unsung heroes of Ethereum in a lot of ways because we don't just talk about it, we have the funding and the stats to back it up. And so what my work as a CMO involves, a bunch of things that I do. There's the operational side, there's content, there's figuring out what we should be doing. And then there's also designing grants programs as well that we will roll out. And everything and anything that falls under that. So anything that's Octant that's external facing is likely something that me and my team have worked on or are working on.
I know that you were part of Ethereum Foundation's Summer of Protocols in 2023, actually.
Yes.
What did you learn from that experience?
That was a very cool program, and it was started by Tim Biko from the protocol team at the EF and Venkatesh Rao. And they're both fantastic and just so brilliant in how they are. I was a researcher, so my goal was actually to research protocols and then to create a project out of it. And my project was a game called Protocol Party. So a lot of different researchers were covering different aspects of protocol. I wanted to bring the social element in because that's how I see the world as how are all these things that we're building, how do they connect with everyday people? And I don't know about you, but my friends do not, if I told them what a protocol is, they would zone out. They will not care. So I created a party game where you could sit with your friends and play a game where you find out your protocol persona through the context of a housewarming party in Dubai. So you've been invited, and then you get a set of cards where every step of the way you're asked a question about what you're going to do before, during, and after a party. And so based on your choices, there's a board game where you will end up with your persona, and then you can learn more about it. And the goal of that was to help people take the first step to learning about protocols in a way that's friendly and inviting and fun and more social. So, it has that kind of community element. And I think the one thing that I learned is, and I tested this out, like I played the game with a bunch of people, got a lot of feedback. It was cool because a lot of non-crypto people could actually understand and kind of felt more interested. Like, okay, this is something I can interact with, that I can understand and I can engage. And I think one thing that builders sometimes forget is that you could have built the most brilliant technical thing, but if you don't know how to sell it and market it, you're only building it for yourself. you need people to understand, and you need people to understand in an accessible language and way. So I think as a builder, it is your responsibility to make whatever you're building feel exciting and fun and something that, would make people want to try it. So that was my big takeaway from that.
It was really interesting to find this project because I didn't know. And when I prepared to our conversation, I found about this program, and I was like, okay, I missed it, and it looked great. And thanks for sharing your experience.
It's an open source game. So I created the buy version. You could create whatever version of that game you wanted. The whole point of the game is for people to take it, interpret it in their own edition and play it. And I hope at some point we can have different versions of the game where you can even compare and see, because what might be normal to me, even to behave and how I would have a conversation during a party, could be so different, for someone from a different part of the world.
You've spoken at Stanford and Harvard and given TEDx talks. I know that you identify as introverts. So, how introverts can present themselves in such loud and crowded spaces like crypto and Web3?
I spoke about a bunch of topics, all the way from startups and entrepreneurship to building audiences to how do you connect with people, and all the way to taking chances and opportunities when you get them. So it's been a range of topics that I've spoken on. And I used to do a lot of public speaking, especially earlier in my startup years, because I was actually afraid of speaking publicly. So I thought exposure therapy is what will work. So whatever opportunity I could find, I would take it up. If I got any invitations, I would just say yes. And it would scare the hell out of me. And I would get so nervous, and I had to literally beat it out of my system, because if you know you need to do something enough times, like, you don't have a choice. So that's kind of how I became a bit more comfortable with it. And I still sometimes get nervous before I get on stage, but after the first few seconds, hope it feels a little bit better and I feel a bit calmer. I've definitely had a lot of techniques that I can implement. But I think being an introvert can be a superpower almost, because you get to observe and you get to listen. And I think a lot of times you'll be surprised that people just want somebody who's going to listen. Like, everyone is so focused on trying to push whatever they're saying that they don't actually absorb. And I think if you're an introvert, especially from a marketing perspective, like, I don't have to be the loudest voice. I can still make an impact. Like, you can even see my followers. I mean, this is the second account that I have. My older one got deleted a while back, but I don't have tens of thousands of followers, but it's okay. Everyone who needs to see my content sees it. And the relationships that I've built. And again, you don't need to be the loudest voice all the time. I do think you need to have an audience. I think that is important. And it's something that I prioritize for the project over my own self, as I want to build out the project account. I think being an introvert can be a superpower, because you just have to be comfortable with paying attention. And it helps in the kind of language you can use, and you're able to pay more attention to cues and whatnot. So, from a marketing perspective, it definitely helps a lot. And from a writing perspective, it helps a lot, because everything is a writing exercise at the end of the day, right? Where if you can actually have enough inspiration from everywhere, you can use it for your own writing and whatever you do create.
I also don't think that I have to be the loudest, but I definitely need the audience. Every person who wants to share their ideas or their mission or build the community obviously needs the audience and needs people to stick to these ideas and to these voices.
100%. I agree with you. And I guess, even to reframe, not every extrovert is probably going to be the loudest. So probably a more perceptive response would be, you just do what you're comfortable with. Like, I think my media training means that I have to be comfortable with being public facing at times, even if it's not what I would intuitively choose. But at the same time, I can still be introverted after my, phased exposure, that's more people facing.
I know that Octant is explicitly values first and pro Ethereum. So, had there been a moment where those values directly cost you growth or community or maybe something else, like values first and then profits or then some other perks?
Yeah, I mean, we have had a bunch of partners that we chose not to go forward with last year because our values didn't align. And I don't want to name them, but at the same time, values are so important from a core leadership level, and it translates to every other thing that we do. And you'll notice, even in the kind of comms and our language, even on Twitter and our socials, it's accessible, it's inviting, it's welcoming. It would be so easy to rage bait our individual accounts or organizational accounts to get quick follows and to get engagement. But we have chosen not to do that, and it's been a very intentional choice and decision. And has that cost us growth? Yes, there's always a cost of not doing the easy thing or what might be considered the easier thing. But we have decided to do things in a way that works for us. And we found our own method to the madness, if you will. And I think it's something that I'm really proud of because I think there are so many projects that are even scammy in nature through what they want to do. And I just know from a leadership perspective, one of the reasons why I've stayed here for so long as I have is because I really appreciate how decisions are made here. And it's in the values, like, I mean, even things that will not directly benefit us. We contributed to Roman Storm's trial and, and contributed to that case. And it doesn't really get us anything, but it's something that we really believe in. Like privacy is a value. It's something that we think is
Uh-huh.
important. And there's so many other instances, even through the funding that we do, right? Like who would give away funds with no strings attached? But it's because it's part of our values to want to see Ethereum grow and seeing open source win and seeing more of that versus closed off projects. It translates into every single thing we've done and I hope we continue to do that and embody that because I know the bigger the profile, the tougher it gets and it's not an easy path to take.
Thank you. And I know that you also created the State of Web3 Grants report, and it was a research. And what do you think about the power that comes with defining what good looks like? And maybe let's start from what actually public good. What does it mean to be a public good project?
Yeah, the State of Web3 Grants report was an interesting one. I co-authored it with Eugene for the first edition. The second edition, we had more co-authors, and it became a much bigger project than it was when we started. But let's start with public goods. So, in a traditional world, public goods are, they're basically things that you have access to that everybody should be able to get access to, right? And in the digital world, it's projects that are non-rivalrous, that are open, that are accessible, that benefit everybody, and that sort of create that infrastructure in a way. But a fun joke that we have is we actually think anything could be defined as a public good. It's hard to argue something isn't a public good a lot of times, actually, because some people have this misconception that public goods should not be monetized. And it's like, actually, no, you can have a financial model because you do need to care about how you're going to last. And there's all of those things to think about. I know it's such a common term to use the word public goods, but I think it's so vague that to give better funding, you need to be so specific with what you're talking about and you need to define it. And that was one of our learnings from grants and running all these grant rounds was the more vague we kept it, the more we were getting projects in terms of our applicant pool that were apples and oranges. How will you compare a project like Protocol Guild to a project like Pizza DAO? You can't. And if you're going to really translate actual impact, it becomes really tough when it's so many different categories. And so that was part of why we decided to start getting more specific with the kinds of projects we were funding, and even with our themes, and even with what we defined as our exclusion criteria, because it helped us choose. And make better choices. You might be building something that's open, but is it going to benefit more people? And how do you even compare two projects where one is being used by like say thousands of people versus those that are being used by like 50 people, right? So it's decisions like that you end up having to learn from. And you have to make and put a lot more thought into every part of how you're going to design a funding round and in every part of how do you compare. And then the most important part, which was one of our learnings from the grants report, was you can't just fund and expect projects to thrive. There's actually a lot of support layers that you need to build to ensure that builders can thrive. There's a lot of support from non-financial aspects that actually add a lot more value and that can contribute a lot more to their success. And there's so many other aspects too, but I would say those are all learnings in terms of what good programs are and what good funding can mean.
Can you name any public good project that are doing great or at least are doing something good in 2026?
Absolutely. And we had a best of best funding round just recently that we wrapped up a couple of weeks ago. I mean, a couple that I would name that I think are everybody's favorites. Protocol Guild is absolutely one. Without them, Ethereum would be, they're doing the hard work of actually helping grow Ethereum and contributing to the development of that. So that's obviously one. Um, Ethereum attestation services, like that's a really great one that I would consider a public good as well. Like they've done really great work. There's a bunch of MEV relays. Like there's a bunch of very core infra from an Ethereum perspective that's very helpful. I'm a little bit biased because I think the technical side is great, but then there's so many community-run local
Uh-huh.
projects that are
Uh-huh.
also very beneficial. Like Funding the Commons is one. Even Pizza DAO to some extent. I know people have opinions on them, but they've done a lot of work to help educate people about both blockchain, Ethereum, and even just how to be part of a DAO. And I think in a lot of ways,
Mhm.
they've actually helped onboard a lot of people in an accessible way. And that's why they have that strong community and following. So I think there's a lot of projects depending on how you would define it. In the strictest sense, I would take the technical definition first. And if I could be a bit more loose and vague about it, I would probably add community definitions to it as well.
Yeah, thanks. And let's discuss Ethereum values because now we see this significant shift in using crypto and in implementation of blockchain tech. And a lot of institutional players are stepping up and using infrastructure. So, what do you think about the current state of Ethereum? And is it aligned with the Ethereum values and what's going on in general?
Yeah, I think we get to define what Ethereum values are. And at the end of the day, when you are competing in a world where there's a lot of different blockchains, it is your responsibility to ensure that Ethereum gets used, gets adopted, and it gets adopted at different levels, right? So, instant use cases are, to me, some that are very personal to me would be things like financial access. Access to technology, regardless of which part of the world you're in. Not being, I think, being anti censorship in that way too. These are very personal values because of what I've seen happen where I'm from. I see a lot of currency inflation and I see a lack of access and even education around systems and systems where like for me to open up a bank account in Pakistan is just such an annoying process versus being able to just have an Ethereum account. So I see that and that's what I believe in, right? That's a very personal one. But then I think when I see institutions adopting Ethereum, I think that's just the next inevitable phase of growth because as we're seeing Ethereum evolve, it means serious players are coming in, and that means there's going to be a lot more at risk. And so that means the magnitude of how long a project can likely last and survive
Mhm.
is probably slightly higher when you have so many projects that are invested and care and actually want it to do well, regardless of what their end incentives are. We both want Ethereum to survive for a very different purpose and reasons, right? And so because of that, I actually think it's a great thing that institutions are looking at Ethereum and I would prefer they do that versus look at other blockchains even, right? That are way more
Uh-huh.
political in their nature. And so I would actually want something that I personally believe in to grow. And I also think even outside of Ethereum, this might be a bit unpopular, maybe. I don't know. I think this is part of Ethereum values, but I think a world where blockchain actually thrives is a lot more like that's the end game. So this is why I also appreciate Solana sometimes because, credit to them where it's due in terms of distribution and
Yeah.
consumer and being able to appeal to people. And I mean, even Stellar and a bunch of others where the real life use cases that a bunch of these
Mhm.
projects have, it's really incredible. So I love seeing just technology thrive in a way that's really productive and useful to people and that brings more access to people regardless of which part of the world they're in. And that's what I'm a pro believer of. And so, whatever technology leads us to that is what I would believe in. And I'm proud of Ethereum values and that we want to see that.
Yeah, thanks. And I want to continue this question. You as an experienced tech entrepreneur and a person interested in Web3 and blockchain crypto for a long time. So do you know, or maybe do you have a conviction that hold you about Web3's future that you believe, but you can't prove, like your intuition or like inner feeling?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know about proving, but I do think we will see a world where AI and blockchain become the future. With AI being so hard to prove, I think blockchain becomes a solution where
Mm-hmm.
you can then prove if something is real or legitimate and you can tell what's real versus fake. And I think like that's the world that I see us going into in the future. I also think we're going to interact with blockchain without knowing what it is at the face of it. And I think as more organizations start to adopt it, like we're just going to see more seamless flows in a way that is very user friendly. So it'll be the exact same thing without calling it that. And that should be the goal too. Like you don't know what your banking app is built on, like you interact with it and you use it. I think that's what I would like to see, and I think we will see because that is so close to us, like that phase where we're seeing that seamless interaction. Those would be my 2. I think the first one is probably more relevant given AI everywhere. And I think that's why it'll be even more.
Yeah, thank you. And let's discuss women. And actually, you shared a bit that you researched Pakistani female entrepreneurs and you know so much about this market and the specific challenges. So, what the difference and what the difference between women founders in the global south and Western culture? So, can you compare and can you highlight these differences?
So the first difference that I experienced was the access to capital pools and was different. And there is a disparity in funding regardless of which part of the world you're in. When I did that research in that year, I believe 3.4% of VC capital went to women-led startups out of $100
Uh-huh.
billion. In the Middle East and in the UAE, the stats were uh, roughly similar or worse, I think, if I'm not wrong. Like, I think it
Probably
was less than
worse.
3%. Yeah, less than 3%. And then the outliers, or the reason why we had those stats, were because you had a few founders who raised most of that capital. And then the other remaining chunk were a very small number, and they got much smaller check sizes. So I think instantly, and even if you compare, I think now I'm not too familiar with this year's
Uh-huh.
stats, but
Uh-huh.
I just know overall the kind of capital in Western markets versus all of the Middle East. Very different in terms of numbers and deal sizes, right? So that's one. And I think because of that, and I'll say this even probably true for the US, depending on which city and hub you've been raised in, the access and proximity to capital and the culture influences a lot. So a founder in the Bay Area is going to operate differently than a founder who has not had access to that kind of an angel network, that kind of culture around you where it's very second nature to be running a startup and to be taking risks and to be investing in people. That's the kind of culture that's different. And so I do think overall access to capital is one thing. And because of that, I think the way you're able to raise money, and it's also different based on the industry, like the kind of rounds you run in crypto versus non crypto, so different. Like AI is different probably because their fundraising rounds are different. But I remember like the round that my husband raised for versus like for his seed round versus his cousin he's running like a biotech startup, and that was his like series A. So like the difference in size or like series, like there's that difference too.
Mm-hmm.
I think another thing would be the culture of like audacity almost. That's something I learned from American culture where you can be really ambitious and do anything and say you want to do anything and you can make it happen. And it's very normalized in a way in American culture from what I've noticed. And it's not, I think that culture of failure where it's okay to fail and start up again. And this was the other thing culturally that's so different. I remember if my friends in the US would lose jobs, they would say, "So I got let go of, I'm looking for opportunities." I remember growing up in the Middle East, I was like, "Oh my God, why would you share that? That is such a shameful thing." But it's so normalized in American culture to be like,
Yeah.
"Oh yeah, that's fine. That wasn't because of me, it's other aspects," right? Whereas in the culture that I grew up in, it is shameful to say you failed. It is shameful to say your startup
Yeah.
failed. And it's shameful to say you got let go of. So you
Mm-hmm.
won't
Mm-hmm.
share that, In fact, you'll go as long as you can without sharing it and find a workaround. So that was so interesting. And I think it portrays into the kinds of decisions you can make when you think you can fail versus when you think you have no choice. I think like that was another one. And then I don't know if other things are based on culture or not, because I think every culture has a different way of even fundraising. Every person, like people have not joint accounts. We call it a committee in Urdu. Well, it's an English word, but the way that my mom and, our community used it was like 10 friends would put in the same amount every month and one person gets to take all of it. So this is how people paid for tuition and rent and big expenses is we're all contributing and agreeing for 12 months. Each person will pay that amount and each month one person gets to take it all. So it's different creative ways to get access to capital in places where you don't get access to it naturally. And so I think every community has different versions of this probably. And I think you can get creative in how you can raise money for like your business that you're starting in, yeah, I guess in the global south versus what you would in the Western world. And I think because of that, you can also it changes who you are because there's a different kind of grit sometimes when you have gone through the rough ends of it. And it's tough to be a founder no matter what part of the world you're in. I don't want to minimize that. It's not like but I think when the landscape is just completely different, you get more grit is what I would say. So I know that a founder who has hustled their way is going to thrive in when they get access to other markets that are just so much more open. Because even if you think about like in Western worlds, in America in particular, because I had noticed a lot more things here, the capital and the purchasing power is so different sometimes. And people are also living on credit a lot of times, which was new as a concept for me because I used to be so anti credit. And then I realized it's a whole system built on you needing to have a
Yeah.
credit score. So you need to be in debt to be able to grow. Um, right? And
Yeah.
America loves, and I think the Western world loves their like themes and festivities. Everything here, the stores, if you go to, they have that theme. Like Valentine's Day is all there, Mother's Day, whatever day you have,
Hmm.
everything you can see, and you can have every single marketing campaign around it because people love to spend in certain almost themes and ways. And so that was so interesting, is like that culture is starting. It's a different format, I guess, in at least the Middle East and the global South. But the way people spend is also a little bit different. And that's interesting because I think that can play into who you are and how you are and whatever. So I think those are just like some of the things that I noticed that are different between, founders in different regions and comparing them.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. It sounds really interesting, and I understand that like Middle East culture is very similar to Eastern European culture. Actually, you're afraid to fail. You don't have any way. Just do your best. You live in the society where you can't make a mistake and you must do something perfect. Because if you're not perfect, why should you do? Even why should
Yeah.
you start? And American culture is very different. And they like, oh, I failed 3 startups, so I can start the fourth one. In European culture, actually, not like Central Europe, for example, they're like, okay, so you failed 3 times, so maybe I shouldn't give you like my money as investors. Maybe you should try something else. I guess that in Middle East, it feels harder. Women in Middle East, they are very brave. If they start something, if they start as founders, if they build especially tech startups or any kind of very innovative or controversial things.
Controversial, yes. But I think the work culture is actually great in the Middle East for women specifically because there's a level of respect people just have for you in general. So I think sometimes that can translate to making things easier. And I think at least in the UAE, which is where I ran my company at that time, I think doors open for you because people also just want to support women founders and women run businesses. So you get a lot of offers sometimes, even from a structural, systematic government level, because they want to see more women thrive and run businesses and whatnot. So even if you're not running VC level businesses, if you're running just like a non-tech business, you can actually thrive and do well relatively because the system is good in that way for you.
What advice would you give to people in the age of AI? How to be relevant and how to grow your personality and your career?
I would not let it near my writing, for example, or I would don't outsource your brain and thinking to AI. Use it as a thought partner, sure, get perspectives, use it for research and data and whatnot. But I actually think the most important part is what are you learning from that? If you don't keep your like mental, like for example, writing mind sharpened, because I think actually writing is an excellent exercise for thinking and for clarifying your thought, right? You can't outsource that to AI. That's just lazy. And I think that's what a lot of people are trying to do is they're fully giving AI tools and using that for content creation.
Uh-huh.
And I think what that's leading to is a loss of soul. Because I read all this content and I just don't like it as much anymore. And I see that versus people who are still real. And I know it's that person who's written that. Like it's just such a big difference. So I think that's important. I think keep experimenting and seeing what works for you. Like I think there is so much more that's possible now. And I would try to work with AI in a workflow where you can use it to outsource the parts that are annoying, like even administrative work for you. Like for me,
Uh-huh.
some of the ways, even as a leader, I've used it is like to think through my workflow and be like, okay, this is my schedule. These are the meetings I have. How can I actually cater and change my schedule so it's most effective for me? So I can have my deep working hours and my call hours. And so I think like using it for aspects of like even structural scheduling, things like that, right? That improve your actual flow is a good experiment. And like that worked really well for me because I was able to learn so much more. And I'm like, oh wait, I didn't think about that. So I feel like that's been interesting. And then I would keep running experiments. There's so much that's possible even with agents and that we're still learning. And from a team perspective and a marketing perspective, we're learning so much more as well. And we're trying a lot of things. And I think I'll have a lot more to share once we've concluded those experiments. It's still too early to share them. But overall, I would say I think it's cool to use it. I think what's going to separate you when everyone is using it though is again your mind and how effectively you can use it. I think that's the end game at the end of the day because it's not just the tools but how you're using them that makes all the difference. So this probably sounds a bit basic, but I think that's my learning because I see way too many people that are so lazy with AI and it really sucks because I can tell they're smart people, but it's just how they're using it is so sloppy.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. No, as you mentioned, there is no reason to outsource your art skills, your writing skills, your ideas creation skills. It's a pleasure to create and to focus on something. I've spent the last weekend drawing pictures and experimenting with acrylic paints and different techniques. It reminded me childhood when we didn't have social media. Like, okay, I'm too old. I didn't have social media in my
Yeah.
early school years.
I was telling my partner the other day, which is that I think we've unleashed a monster and there's no way to reel it back in. So we're gonna have to learn how to deal with the consequences.
It's stressful for the majority of people, I guess. Even tech geeks were shocked by this open cloud. This case is really crazy, and it shows us like we live in this black mirror, and we live in the middle AI era, and it looks fascinating and scary at the same time.
I think these AI companies have a lot more responsibility, and I think yeah, we can't change what they've done. So the best we can do is now figure out how to work with it.
Thanks so much for sharing your experience, for sharing so many insights and valuable things. Actually, now we'll know more about public good projects, about Ethereum values, your past and your future, and the future of AI. So thanks so much for your time, and I will leave the link to your profile under this episode so people can follow you, ask you questions, and see what's happening in your life and in life of Octant. And congrats on your new role. It's a great achievement.
Thank you so much, Daria. Thank you for having me and for this lovely chat. It was fun to go back to old media days too, and to just reflect and share more of that.
Yeah, thank you. Guys, if you liked this episode, share it with your friends, like it on YouTube, and download it on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And see you next time. Bye.
Bye.